Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I get a job as the caretaker of an old abandoned prison labor camp. The owners are gone for 6 months. Situated on 80 acres and surrounded by bush. All of the buildings are original. Opened in 1920, closed in 1955. A lot of people died out there and prisoners were kept in awful conditions. Has its own graveyard. The house is at the front of the property and the prisoner area is at the very back, just visible from the house. Interior walls of the house are 2 feet wide and all internal doors are old hardwood. Width of the internal walls and window placement means light and air does not flow correctly. First night my dog freaks out at being in the bedrooms and claws at the door. I feel creeped out too. We sleep in front of the fire in the main room for the entire 6 months, and I piss in the sink to avoid going up the hallway. I made sure to secure all firewood inside before nightfall as my dog and I did not like exiting the house at night. We hear the prison quarter doors slamming open and shut over and over again in the distance at night. In the morning, get the beanos out and see the doors are still latched. Would hear the chains from inside being smacked against the wall. Would sometimes hear muffled screams. Would sometimes see a flickering light like a candle light. Things inside the house would move. Gets to the point where I refuse to open the blinds at night and make sure I'm home before nightfall every night to prepare for the night. That was the worst experience of my life. The only plus side was that sleeping on the floor for 6 months made my back feel amazing, although sometimes I would knee or elbow to the ground and wake up with a sore joint. My dog hated that place, and before this we never slept together, but since then we always sleep together like we did in front of the fire. The entire place was creepy, and even my friends, some of which were hardcore Christian, Catholic country boys and deer hunters, didn't like being out there at night. Another story in the same place. Driving down a very shitty road through the mountains following a truck at night. We come around a very long sweeping left-hand bend. There is a pure black border collie sitting on the side of the road watching the truck. The dog waited until the front of the truck had passed it. It then lunged forward and shoved its head under the front axle of the second trailer. Died instantly. It legitimately looked like the dog was waiting to die, and it looked like it when it did it. It made me feel very uncomfortable.
Worked for small amusement park for many years. Filled in as caretaker for a couple of months while they found a new one. Lived in an apartment on premises. One night a buddy comes by to hang out. It was lonely there. We decide to go monkey around in the haunted house. Part of my job is to turn everything on in the morning, make sure it all works okay. I've been doing this for years, so I know the inside of this place and how it works like the back of my hand. Decide not to turn sound or music on, since it's fairly loud and might disturb neighbors. Discover going through the HH and having it be silent except for the squeaks and clicks of the machinery is way creepier than normal operation. Most things are motion controlled, but there is a small hidden control booth where a couple of things are manually controlled by an employee. One of the manually controlled things is like a zombie bride that sits in a chair. The employee pushes a button as people walk past, and the bride pops up out of the chair by pneumatic power. As me and Buddy get to bride, it starts going apeshit. It's popping up out of the chair repeatedly. It shouldn't be able to do this because A, no one is manning the booth, and B, the air compressor takes a long time to spool up enough pressure to do anything, and we'd only just turned it on. Noped out of there. I have many creepy stories from when I was caretaking there, but that's the only one I haven't been able to explain. Park is outside of town, on the edge of fairly extensive woods. Park is on a hill. Caretaker apartment located at the bottom of edge of the park, so the whole park is above it on the hill. One of the caretaker duties is to monitor the park-wide motion alarm system. When alarm goes off, you're supposed to go out and check around for people trying to break in. It goes off on average 3 or 4 times a night, a lot more if it's raining or windy. It's usually branches or leaves falling into the sensors or animals. There are a lot of animals. One night I get woken up by the alarm at 3 a.m. It's one of the sensors at a snack booth at the top of the hill. I grumble and put my shoes on, grab my flashlight, and hike up the hill to check it out. I go around corner and shine my light at the snack booth. A family of possums have managed to knock a lid off a large trash can and are digging through it for grub. There's like 10 of them all kinda sitting on the rim. Simultaneously slowly turn their heads towards me and then proceed to hiss and screech at me. Nope. The thing you have to understand about the critters at the park that makes them all extra spoopy is that, A, they're all acclimated to people. For the most part they stay hidden during the day, but they are around. They couldn't give a single shit about you. B. They're all huge from glutting on junk food they find in the garbage and on the ground. I used to have a collection of pictures I took of gray squirrels the size of cats covered in nacho cheese. Another time. One night an alarm goes off late, like when I am along the fence with the neighbors. It's one you kinda have to watch because the neighbors is one of those motorhome campgrounds, and if someone wanted to, they could just hike through the woods and hop a fence. Go out there, don't see anything, check around for people, then go back to the fence for closer look. The fence is all torn and tangled up, and there's blood everywhere. Call out in case someone is hurt. Hear rustling in the undergrowth like 20 feet away. Nope. It was probably a deer that got caught in the fence, but it was still creepy.
This was a few years ago during my undergrad. I was 20 at the time. I did some volunteer work at a remote animal sanctuary for wolves. The place was a good 30 miles from the nearest town, about 1,000 people, and about 400 miles from the nearest city. The sanctuary itself contained around 35 wolves at the time. Most of the less docile wolves are contained in about 30 by 90 feet cages with about 4 wolves per cage. Others roamed free, but stayed on sanctuary grounds for food. There's about a 300 feet grass clearing in either direction from the cages to the tree line, no fence. On the north side there's another massive about 10 square mile clearing. The caretaker and owner is a quiet man who lives alone other than occasionally hiring workers or receiving volunteers like us. Spent day doing hard labor building wolf dens. After we eat everyone goes to bed early at about 8 a.m. My tent is set up a good 400 feet from the owner's home, and the caravan my friends were sleeping in because that was the nearest soft turf, and I was the only one who brought a functioning tent, so the caravan was full. One of the free-roaming wolves who I played with that day, a tame gray wolf border collie hybrid, was following me. I petted him before closing my tent. The wolves started howling like crazy, as I was told they would do, fairly normal. Some of them were growling or fighting, but it's all normal wolf behavior. I'm tired and I'm cold as shit, so I don't even bother changing my clothes. I added a few clothing layers of whatever sleeping bags and cloth I had and curled up in it. Also improvise earplugs by wrapping my ears with an extra shirt around my head. This would later turn out to be a big mistake. Also around this time I discovered that I was too tall for my two-person tent, so if I slept diagonally my head and feet still brushed against the sides of the tent. I pass out at around 8:30 and then sleep until something wakes me. I check my cell phone and it shows it's just a few minutes shy to midnight. Most of the wolves were still howling like crazy. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I decided to go for a stroll. Outside my tent I see the hybrid wolf bro curled in front. I stepped over it to not wake it. Everything was still normal at this point. Anyway, I was walking through the sanctuary towards the large clearing, and I remember thinking how clear the night sky was. I was staring out across the clearing and noticed silhouettes moving in the tree line across. There was a lot of wildlife in the area, so I didn't think much of it. I was perhaps sleep deprived to think about what I was really seeing. That was at least 2 miles out. The shadows were massive, far bigger than wolves, and they were the biggest known animals in the area. At this point I felt really tired, so I went back to my tent, wrapped up again the same as before, and almost instantly fall asleep. Here's where things gets really strange. Wake up to an extremely loud cry. It seemed far away, at least a few miles, and sort of similar to a wolf, but I don't know how to explain it. It sounded more sickly, more like a screeching sound than a crying wolf. The sound was muffled from my improvised ear plugs, so I thought it was just my imagination. Briefly checked my phone, 1:45, and tried to go back to sleep. A few seconds later something hits against my head through the tent cloth, hard. I'm pretty sure it was the hybrid wolf sleeping near me, as I heard it crying silently, but I can't be sure. I'm thoroughly awake now, but I'm a bit dizzy and my ears are still singing from the blow. I nearly shit myself from what happened next. The same cry, only it was loud and couldn't be more than 50 yards away. I just sat there thinking definitely not a wolf. I scanned the side of the tent it was coming from, hoping I can catch a glimpse of its shadow or something, or that it just leaves, too scared to move or turn on any lights. The only thing more frightening than the cry was something I only noticed after about 30 seconds of sitting there. Silence. There was nothing, not a single similar wolf cry or howl. I could hear no movement at all coming from the wolf dens. Then suddenly the same cry again. With slight relief this time I estimated that it was much further away again, at least a few hundred yards. I frantically got up, unwrapped myself and unzipped the tent. I figured this was my chance to run towards the caretaker's house or at the very moment make it to the caravan and pray to God it isn't locked. I didn't have any guns or anything. I kept minimal clothing to run faster, but as soon as I got out of the tent I froze. I saw the wolves. They weren't sleeping. They were all sitting upright, frozen, all staring in the same direction towards something on my right. There was something gleaming in one of the far cages, but I couldn't make it out. I slowly turned towards the tree line about 300 yards out, hoping there's nothing there. I didn't see it at first. I was scanning slowly, then a terrible dread set over me. Something was staring back at me. Its skin was almost matte black, the eyes were clearly gleaming, reflecting moonlight. It was definitely not a wolf as it stood on its thin hind legs, and its torso was much bigger than any mammal I know of. Its arms were long and it looked like it had 10-inch claws. And it was big, at least 7 or 8 feet by my estimate. I kept staring at it for another few seconds, debating what to do. Then it suddenly sprang and disappeared into the tree line. I made for the house, and that's when I really shit myself. I saw it again, coming out of the tree line running on all 4 limbs. It had moved at least 300 feet in the time I took to turn and was now running towards me from an angle between the tree line and the house. I decided to go for it anyway and sprinted. When I looked up again it was less than 100 feet. Suddenly a shot rang out, and to my relief the thing bolted for the trees. I looked over to the house and the caretaker was there, rifle in hand, with the hybrid wolf. He ran towards and asked if I was all right. I was still shaking like crazy from both adrenaline and cold, but I managed to blurt out, "Yeah, what the hell was that?" He ignored me and ran towards the far side of the sanctuary. I followed him. The gleaming in the cage I saw earlier turned out to be blood. All the wolves in one of the dens had been massacred. Completely ripped to shreds. Some of the wolves in the other cages began moving and crying again at this point. At this point I saw the thing again peeking out of the same tree line. I taped the man with the rifle on his shoulder to indicate. He immediately took aim and the thing bolted towards us. It was just as fast as earlier. Less than a second later he shot it, and I definitely heard him hit flesh. I'm pretty sure it was a lung shot, but the thing hardly seemed to be phased. It kept running though. It veered off our course and started heading for the big clearing. The caretaker had a bolt action, but he kept his aim on it as he reloaded. I swear the thing ran so fast that he covered the entire distance of that massive clearing in less than 40 seconds. The rest of the night was uneventful. I slept on the caretaker's floor. The others somehow didn't even come out to investigate, though the next morning they told me they had heard the shots, but went back to bed. When I asked the caretaker about it the next morning, he played it off as if it was just some normal unknown animal that got into the den. I suspected that this happens regularly and he doesn't want to scare people off from working with him. For some reason I decided to keep what I saw quiet from the others. I don't know why, but something, the look on the caretaker's face when he talked to me the next day said something like, "Shut up about last night and don't tell anyone, will you?" We were done anyway, so I packed my shit, played with the hybrid wolf bro a bit to say goodbye, and we drove off. Still don't know what that thing was to this day, but I don't go camping in remote areas anymore.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Ever since I could remember, my family life was never what I thought it was meant to be. I suppose my comparisons to the harmonious relationships portrayed by my favorite television programs and family commercials set my standards quite high at a young age. But even if I had envisioned a family as what it really was back then, I still would have been disappointed. My mother, she's a materialist, you see, always looking to have the nicest house or the perfect outfit. When someone is a materialist, they require money, and my mother needed more money than what she could make alone. Working as a caretaker for the disabled, her income is by no means low. However, the dollar signs you can see flashing against her eyes outdo those that lay waiting in her purse. That's how she turned to my father, a wretched creature. He works construction but does turnaround jobs in various parts of the country. I don't know the full details about his work because I never cared to ever ask. All I know is that he was loaded from the start of their relationship. I also know that's the only reason my mother was ever with him. My father is a very abusive man. He would get into fights with my mother over the simplest of things and beat her savagely. For a long time I was scared out of my mind. I would always retreat to my room and sob like the child I was at the very hint of trouble between them. It was normal for me for a long time, but as I said, my expectations for a family life became quite high. As I began to grow older, my fear and confusion made way for anger and betrayal. My mother started to notice this, how I would get just a little more defiant before he yelled at her. How I didn't flinch or cry as much. I know she noticed the way I looked at him. I hated the man with an intense passion. She began to manipulate me in the weeks he was away from us to work. She would tell me that he was once a kind man, he once cared. She would confide to me that she was afraid to leave him, scared that he would become more violent and try to kill her. Looking back, I realized that she even slightly put the blame on me at times, so I would feel guilty. She'd occasionally remind me that I wasn't planned. She'd mention it started going downhill a little before you were born. She would never outright accuse me, but she made the guilt present. Her plan worked, and because of the pity and the guilt, I started to gain enough courage to stand up for her. Once I did, my father's punching bag switched from my mother to me. He would start an argument with Mom only to have me yell at him, and I would take abuse to the very threshold of my sanity. I grew up depressed. I shied away from every human being that tried making contact with me until I reached my teen years and instantly fell into the wrong crowd. My depression brought me to alcohol and eventually drugs. I became more and more defiant, which got me in more trouble and gave me more beatings. My parents never taught me anything properly, so I would never learn my lesson, and the cycle just kept turning and turning. To be honest, as I look back on it, I'm surprised I didn't end my own life. I thought about it plenty of times before, but I always chickened out or rationalized my mindset in some way. Although I didn't end my life, my mental state was far from healthy. The night that everything went to shit was just like any other for me. My father was beating harshly because Mother hadn't left the television the way he wanted it, and I stood up for her. His anger was coming down on me with the force of his fists. He always hit me in the body, knowing never to touch my face. He was smart enough not to get caught, after all. I remember wanting to fight back desperately that night, more than I ever wanted to. I'm not sure why, I just know I was extremely angry then. I felt like my father, but I didn't feel strong enough. Dad suddenly turned away from me, and I noticed that there were people standing in our apartment, neighbors that had heard the racket for years and finally decided to do something about it. My father was barking viciously at them, howling threats and screaming. My mother started to act more concerned about her precious baby boy as soon as she noticed them, and that was the first hint that she was putting on some sort of act. I laid on the ground in a daze for a few moments, until a thought occurred to me. I had the advantage now. My father was distracted. I could finally get my payback. I don't remember what my thought process was after that. I barely remember the encounter at all. I got up from the ground and rushed to the kitchen. Luckily, my father was too busy screaming at the intruders to notice I had slipped out from his clutches. I reached right for a kitchen knife and held it in my hand as tightly as I could. I remember my knuckles going as white as snow, and I remember stabbing my father as hard as I could in his stomach. He had a slight delayed reaction and buckled over slightly to the ground. There was a brief moment of silence. My mother and the couple that had come barging in kind of just looked at me in shock. I remember screaming at him, howling at him in the most animalistic of voices I could ever produce. I felt as if I had changed into something much darker than a human. Thinking about it now scares me to no end. This did nothing to quell his rage. He screamed threats at me, and I knew he was going to come after me. He would have killed me if he'd gotten a hold of me. I ran out of the apartment as fast as I could, and by the time I made it to the stairs, he wasn't far behind. However, I got lucky, and as he rushed after me, he tripped on the steps and came tumbling down to the ground floor on his shoulders. By the time I reached the front entrance, the police were already there, and the first thing they did was subdue me. I was still holding the knife in my hand, and it was covered in blood. I was brought in and questioned, and they told me if I got charged it could be as an adult. I was 16 at the time because of the severity. I thought I was going to go to prison, but I was let out after a couple of hours because the family that had come barging in called the cops before they did to report a domestic disturbance. They lied to the police and told them it was in self-defense. I imagine my mother went along with it to keep up appearances. My father survived, but just barely. I didn't pay too much attention to the explanations I was given. All I know is that he was pretty much a vegetable. He had hit his head quite a few times as he fell down the stairs. He was confined to a wheelchair, and his personality was completely gone. He didn't talk, react, or even show any emotions in his face. He looked like a living, breathing dead person. Seeing as my mother was already a caretaker for these people, she worked it out with her employers. She didn't press charges on my father to look after him as well. The amount of money she had with him working was much more than what she was making now, but it was still more than before she met him. I generally stay in my room, but every time I see my father now, it chills me to the bone. I don't think he's really alive. I can't believe that at all. I'm starting to think that his soul has left its shell, but the shell didn't quite disintegrate as it should have. What's more, I feel physically and mentally uncomfortable being in our apartment. I feel like there's something here, always watching me. The amount of anger I can sense at all times is immense, and it's hard not to go a few hours without breaking down into fits of tears or fear. I think my father is still around here, I just don't think that it's in his own body. I know he wants his revenge.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.